Okay, well, let me begin, and whoever else is joining us will have the chance to join during my introduction. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are in the world. My name is Alisa Kovalenko, and I'm the director of the Ukrainian Institute London. And the Institute champions Ukrainian culture and shapes the conversation about Ukraine in the UK and beyond. We explore Ukrainian perspectives on global challenges. We are an independent charity registered in England and Wales, and we rely on your donations to develop our program of public-facing events, educational courses, and digital content. So if you are able to support us, please do so. We'll be very grateful. Just to let you all know, we are recording this event and it will be available on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to share it with your friends and colleagues if you wish to, or on social media. So in the face of Russia's war against Ukraine, Ukrainian society has shown remarkable resilience and ability to reform under immense pressure. And one example of this resilience is women's participation in the military. And that is what we'll be discussing today during the event with two excellent speakers, Alisa Kovalenko and Tamara Martsenyuk. Women's experience of wars is rarely featured in discussions of warfare. And if it is usually spoken on behalf of those women who experience wars rather than by them. Today, our speakers will focus on the experiences of Ukrainian servicewomen, so specifically those who are actively participating as part of the military. But before we begin, let me briefly outline a slightly larger, more general picture. Of course, the vast majority of people who experience wars do so as civilians, regardless of their gender. And yet when we discuss wars, we tend to focus our attention on the trenches and the battlefields for obvious reasons. But these spaces are highly masculinized and they tend to be dominated by men in uniform. So this already creates a kind of skewed image of a picture of war for us. Civilian women tend to be relegated to a category of women and children, and that carries a connotation that they require some sort of special protection in times of war. Now, this category is dated and it is misleading, but it's important to point out that civilian women are disproportionately affected by wars, not because of some biological traits, but because they frequently find themselves having an unequal status in society. In Ukraine and as in much of the world, men continue to be higher earners and breadwinners. Conscription of men and the focus of economy towards the needs of the war means that women are often tasked with looking after the needs of their dependents, often single-handedly, including their economic needs. They are often also the main carers and much more likely to be displaced, whether internally or externally. And this means that they are also at very high risk of destitution, trafficking, and other forms of exploitation. Wars also affect women disproportionately when it comes to conflict-related sexual violence, and we'll talk about that more in the discussion today. Also, it's worth pointing out that civilian women have no access to institutional support that an army can provide, so from arms and shelter to rations. At the same time, in Ukraine, it's civilian women who are the main force behind a huge volunteer and civil society movement that has been securing provisions for all parts of society, including the army, for all years of Russia's war against Ukraine, the first 8 years, as well as the last 12 months of the full-scale war. So in Ukraine, the vast majority of women have chosen to join the large and formidable network of civilian volunteers, and a minority chose to join the armed forces. But this minority is really not small. As of November 2022, and perhaps Tamara will have more recent data for us as well, almost 60,000 women were employed by the Ukrainian armed forces. 41,000 of those are service women, and around 5,000 are involved in direct combat. And we'll talk about these numbers and figures, why they're so high, what challenges service women face, but also what obstacles they've already managed to overcome to get this far during the discussion today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers to you. Our first speaker is Tamara Martsenyuk. Actually, Tamara will come second, but I'll introduce her now. Tamara Martsenyuk holds a Ph.D. in sociology. She is an associate professor at the Department of Sociology, University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. After evacuating from Kyiv following the full-scale invasion, Tamara has been hosted by Free University Berlin. She is also a visiting scholar at Leuphana University in Germany. And her research interests relate to gender and social structure, among them women's access to the military. In 2015-2021, Tamara was part of the research team that conducted the sociological study Invisible Battalion. I hope we'll discuss it at some length today. And the study demonstrated the successes and challenges of gender equality implementation in the Ukrainian armed forces. It also discussed the status of female veterans and the problem of sexual harassment in the military. So really looking forward to hearing more from Tamara soon. And the other speaker that we're hosting today is Alisa Kovalenko, who's a Ukrainian director. She lives in Kyiv. She graduated from the Karpenko-Karye University of Cinema in Kyiv, and she also studied at the Andrzej Wajda Cinema School of Warsaw. After the first feature-length documentary, Sister Zoe, Alisa directed her debut feature documentary, Alisa in Warland, about the war in Eastern Ukraine. Alisa's second documentary, Home Games, was selected by 65 film festivals and was screened by Ukrainian Institute London during one of our film festivals, and it received 8 awards. Home Games was nominated for the Best Ukrainian Documentary in 2019 at the by the Ukrainian Film Academy. Days after Russian forces charged into Ukraine, following the full-scale invasion, she decided to put down her camera, suspended her work as a filmmaker, and decided to volunteer to fight instead with the military. And she'll talk about that. She is not currently with us yet because she's at a closing ceremony of the Riga Film Festival, but she will join us soon live, but for now I'd like to play a video that she recorded for us this morning, explaining her participation in the armed forces, and then we'll move on to Tamara's contributions as well. So let me just share the video with you now.
Hi everyone. I will talk a bit about my experience being inside a unit of Ukrainian Volunteer Army. First, I would like to give you a little bit of background because it's important to explain why actually I joined the army, why I went to fight. It's a long story, but I will try to make it short because everything actually started since with the Maidan Revolution. Back then I was studying documentary films in Karpenko-Karye Film School. And of course, during all events on Maidan during the revolution, it was so important to film, and me and my colleague, we spent days and nights on Maidan filming. At the time, we didn't even think that we will make a film out of it, but we felt that it's so important to document part of our history of our country. After Maidan Revolution, I went to Donetsk, and I filmed a bit in Donetsk, and after I went through many checkpoints, like pro-Russian separatist checkpoint, I went to Ukrainian positions next to Slaviansk. I was filming Ukrainian armies there, and after one day on the way back, I was captured by pro-Russian separatists who beat me first, and after they brought me to Kramatorsk administration. Kramatorsk back then was occupied, and it was a Russian officer who interrogated me. He told me I'm head of counterintelligence service. So there were many hours of interrogation. I was like trying to make this puzzle in my like brain, like how to create a fake story that they believe, how not to give important information and not to harm people, my close people, and also soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers who stayed on the position next to Slaviansk. I also experienced sexual violence, and yeah, this Russian officer like also forced me to like take out of my clothes, and he tried to rape me. After 4 days in captivity, I was released. It was mainly because all foreign journalists knew that I'm in captivity, and to keep me long or to kill me or like do something worse, it was like kind of putting themselves like in not good position in front of foreign media, so they decided to let me go. After that, I went to frontline in Pesky and Donetsk airport. I was filming Ukrainian volunteer unit there. I wanted to make a film about people who, without like mostly without military experience, decided to go and to fight for the country. At the time, I had like a growing inner dilemma, how to stay a filmmaker, observing this reality, and still keeping this distance which camera always create in between. I wanted to act by then. I wanted to do something more. And of course, when you're staying for a long time with fighters, with soldiers, you become like a family. And I also felt that I want to also fight with them. I want to do more. I want to act. Back then, I decided that I will stay. I will stay with my camera, but if this war will grow and it will become a full-scale war, I will put away my camera and I will go to fight. So when Russian invasion started, full-scale Russian invasion started, I was in Donbass again, but I was together with the characters of my new documentary, which I've been filming for 3 years. It was about teenagers from Donbass who are living in small towns very close to frontline. And at that time, this dilemma went back to me. I felt completely useless. I felt like what I can do with my camera, how I can help people. And I felt that I died as a director. This reality was much stronger than film, and I understood that I have to fulfill my promise now. This is the time. So first I help some of my characters with evacuation from Donbass. After I said goodbye to my mother, my son, and I went to the front line. Before, in early March, I saw on internet that a commander whom I know from 2014, the greatest commander I ever met, that he was creating Ukrainian volunteer unit as a part of Ukrainian volunteer army. So I decided to join them. So I came. I wrote bars. This commander is bars. I wrote bars and I said I want to come. He was thinking that I want to film maybe, and we went to talk. And I told him, Bars, I come not for filming but for fighting. He was silent, but after he said, okay, we'll see. So after I stayed 4 months on the front line, first in Kyiv region and after in Kharkiv region. Our task was keeping our positions on a sector which we were controlling. In Kharkiv region, we also participated to some counterattack operations. Last month in Kharkiv region, we were very close to the Russian border, and it was very, very intense at the time. They were bombing us a lot. We were controlling a road, very important road, and we were controlling greenery very close to Russian border. And they were bombing us a lot in this greenery, and we even at the moment we call this greenery of death. My last task was in last position was I had to explode Russian tanks because a road was mined, and I had to, we had to, because I was together with two comrades, so we had to explore the road when we will see Russian tanks coming. But they went like they choose another road, so didn't happen, and we survived. And after like a few weeks later, our military base in Kharkiv was bombed. Our comrade Shtik died there. After that, my commander said, okay, this is the end of volunteer Ukrainian army, end of our unit, and we have to join regular army. Because actually we were doing the same thing like as a regular army, just we didn't have salary, we didn't have any like medical or any kind of social benefit from this. Yeah, but talking about my experience as a woman in army, I will tell one thing which was the most complicated for me. It was like that, when you're a man, you come in to the structure to like mostly with a man, and you man, you're already a fighter. Doesn't matter what you did before. And if you're a woman, you have to prove that you're a fighter, especially if you didn't have military experience. And for me, it was a really painful process to prove that I can be like equal soldier. I can do the same things. I can fight on the same level, or I will try to reach this level. And I can do like all kind of things what men can do, like almost everything. And sometimes in the way of proving this, I was doing even more than I could, like because I tried so much to show that I can do like everything and I can be equal with everybody. I never like accepted somebody carry my bag, or like I never asked for any help. And I always, when it was like some complicated task, and I always said, yeah, like, sorry, I will do this, like, and I show that I have no fear, that I can stay under bombings and trenches when it's cold, when it's rain. And it took time, and of course after everybody like felt it and understood that, okay, I'm a like fighter like they, in the same way. I'm not a tiny like weak girl who just like who was there like yeah. And I know I know lots of cases like this. My case is even not the worst because I had a great unit, and I was lucky. Actually, yeah, I had a great unit. I had a great commander who supported me a lot, who trusted me also a lot, and he saw that I'm like work very hardly to prove that I'm a good fighter. But I know many cases when you with some friends like female fighters who like their commanders didn't let them go to some operations because women they like limited the like kind of spectrum of their work on the front line. And we have this problem, and some even high-ranked commanders, it's like this like a patriarchal way of mentality. It still exists, and sometimes in very extreme, like I know some extreme cases when one commander told one woman, "I will never take any woman in my unit," like complete discrimination, like gender discriminational things. And we have to work on this like field, because of course we have lots of women who are now we would join army, but still we have to break this like still old like patriarchal way of thinking, fight with this as well. Yeah, because for me it was really, even I had not the worst case, but still for me it was very traumatic experience, always living with this like that constantly you have to prove and prove and prove and train more and show more, like, and yeah, this was my case. And yeah, and we can discuss other things, and you can ask any questions later. Thank you.
So that was a first-hand testimony of someone who's seen the war from within the military. And now over to you, Tamara, to give us a bit of a context of participation of women in the army starting from 2014 and how it's changed.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I have some slides that I want to show you. Okay, so I will talk about women in the armed forces in Ukraine through mainly gender sociology perspective. And in my studies of women and war, gender and war, I try to show not only victimhood discourse, that is rather common when you do research on gender and war, but also to talk more about agency, how women resist and participate in different activities. And actually, in my studies, I showed diversity of these activities, but in this presentation, I'll stress, of course, on military one, but we should remember that also there are other forms, volunteer, community, cultural, symbolic, etc. It's important to mention that war in Ukraine started 8 years ago from the occupation of Crimea and part of Donbass, and there is this legacy of resistance, also changes in the armed forces of Ukraine, and I try to show that for this last 9 years, two major values becoming more important for the armed forces: professionalism and dignity. In 2018-14, and Alisa was telling also in her life story, actually this protests were called Revolution of Dignity. And people, women and men, who's been participating in this Euromaidan protests, later, some of them, they also joined frontline as volunteers. And there is also a large role of grassroots activism and civil society, and we would say that actually a number of members of civil society, different people from spheres like Alisa, they now participate, they fight in the armed forces. But it's also, of course, important to talk about not only bottom-up but top-down approach and the level of state politics, gender equality politics, and Ukraine compared to other former Soviet Union republics has quite very well developed legislation on implementation of gender equality. And the national level, in general, gender equality is guaranteed, of course, by Constitution of Ukraine and also by law of Ukraine on ensuring equal rights and opportunities of women and men. That was implementing more than 15 years ago. And in the security sector, we have particular legislation on equal rights also on women and men while serving in the armed forces of Ukraine and other military formation. When war started, Ukraine also joined United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. And currently we have the second national action plan for the period till 2025. Also, at the international level, Ukraine ratified, of course, CEDAW, but after invasion this summer, and it's very important for the civil society of Ukraine, for gender feminist community, Ukraine finally ratified the so-called Istanbul Convention, Council of Europe Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. And this document is also important for the prevention and fighting gender-based violence, sexual violence in general, and in different spheres of the society. And as as a scholar and sociologist, with other my colleagues, Anna Martsenyuk, Anna Kvit, we 8 years ago, we started sociological study about the gender discrimination in the Ukrainian military. This study was initiated by Maria Berlinska, a volunteer who's been doing a reconnaissance, women in military who faced problem of gender discrimination because this combat position, air reconnaissance, was not recognized as a combat position allowed for women. And together with, so Maria asked for help to do sociological study, and we started in 2015 with general study on women's participation in anti-terrorist operation. And later, as you could see from this list, actually, we are currently doing the 5th study. The second one was about women's veterans. The third one on sexual harassment. Later, we are finalizing on women access to military education. Military education is also a very important topic if you need to have successful integration into labor market and security and defense sphere as labor market. And currently we are doing actually a project funded by UK Special Defense Advisor Team, where we monitor recommendations and previous research results for the 9th years of war. You could see our project web page, and these sociological studies actually became larger advocacy campaign with different activities, among them also documentary. Invisible Battalion about the 6 stories of different military women, and you may recognize some of them because they are still continue fighting after this terrible invasion. And also what is very important that we launched online course, Gender Equality and Combating Sexual Harassment in the Military, only 2 years ago. And you may see from statistics that despite invasion and in general, for the 2 years of this course, we have more than 20,000 people who received certificates. Majority of them are men. It's the average age is 34. So we do hope that they are men who are serving in the armed forces. And as for some of our research results, because of course it's really a very broad topic, so due to the lack of time, I stress only some figures. As for very recent data, particularly today's data from the Ministry of Defense, in the Ukrainian armed forces, there are more than 50,000 of women. We do have some statistics where it's possible to see that actually as for 2022 year in the armed forces, there are more than 5,000 officers, more than 13,000 surgeons, and the same almost a bit smaller amount of soldiers. So actually, as for military ranks, I would say more women are becoming, officers. Also, as far as the war is already for 9 years, as a result, we have more than 26,000 women who became veterans of anti-terrorist operation. 23 women died. Also, it became possible to break the glass ceiling because now there are several women with the highest military status of general, and 5 years ago the first one, Lyudmila Shohelay, became it. And actually in the military, as in general in the labor market of Ukraine, there is a problem of horizontal and vertical gender segregation of military. Yes, more women are in so-called feminine women's professions. At the same time, it became possible to open more combat positions for women. And this problem remains as such, but it's challenge. And from year, it's becoming, I would say the situation is becoming more equal compared to 9 years ago. Also, Ukrainian female veteran movement is quite visible actor in general. As for veteran movements, you may check their webpage and donate for the needs of women for their organizations, and you could see that actually these women, for the number of years, some of them they became politicians, others leaders of veteran diplomacy. They were coming abroad to meeting with politicians, NATO, before invasion, even talking about the war and the threat of larger, larger war in Ukraine. Also, I would like to present only some results of public opinion survey representative for the whole Ukraine. And what is interesting, it's in general the readiness of Ukrainian society to resist with arm. It became, I would say, it became a huge surprise for the international community that Ukraine was resisting, and Kyiv and other cities were resisting, and the question was asked 1 week after invasion, but also recently in January, the data are similar. So Ukrainians were asked, are you personally ready or not ready to put up the resistance to stop the Russian occupation of Ukraine? And so the respondents, they could choose between completely ready, rather ready, completely not ready, rather not ready. And you see that vast majority, 70%, they chose completely and rather ready to personally participate in the armed resistance. Of course, men more ready, and in general, they have more skills to do this. So 70% of men, but majority of women are also ready to resist with arms. Another interesting question that we continue asking in 5-time difference you see in 2018 and recently, like a couple of months ago, it's what kind of army should Ukraine introduce? And you see the most popular variant that became even more popular, it's actually enlistment of both men and women, voluntary contract basis, but on equal opportunities. So it's professional armed forces. The variant conscription of all men and only of some women as the second one popular. It's actually the variant that we have now. Conscription only of men, also much less popular. So-called Israeli variant, conscription of all men and all women, is not popular, at very, very low popularity, but popularity increased a bit. Yes, twice more, but still we understand that it's an issue how to implement this. So in general, we could see, I would say, as a result of public opinion survey, it's quite clear that society supports equal rights and opportunities for women and men, and also professional armed forces. So remember, these values of dignity and professionalism are very important. And just to summarize, what are successes of gender of gender equality implementation in the security and defense sector for the last years. It's actually access of women to a number of military occupations, combat ones. Women officially now could be, snipers, drive military vehicle, to do reconnaissance, etc. It's recognition of female veterans and their needs. It's gender equality, more gender equality in military legislation. It's improved protection of women from gender-based violence and sexual harassment, but still this problem is, of course, it's a big issue. It's access to military education at all levels that open for girls and also for women. As for secondary military education, the most prestigious military college, Lyceum, named by Ivan Bogun. Actually, the first 50 girls entered it, already graduated, and they are in armed forces. It's gender training and more education for staff. There is actually a number of gender advisors, also not only for the top military level, but for, different military staff. And of course, it's me as a scholar, I would say it's important to mention that in order to do some reforms, it's it's important to have results, research results, and sociological research, statistics, and this information is becoming more important when different reforms are being implemented. And just to finish, I would say that even on the media, cultural, symbolic level, you see that the role of women in military is more and more recognized. And if you, Eurovision Song Contest last year, Kalish Orchestra won with Stefania's song, and you may watch this video clip and see that actually in the video clip there is recognition and visibility of women who are saving, female soldiers who defend their country, their home, and their children. And this, I would say, even some nuances in different media cultural discourse, so they are also very important. But at the same time, despite, of course, all successes, there are some challenges, and one of the challenge, it's still, despite the talking about gender-sensitive approach, when we talk about female military needs like uniforms, like infrastructure, it's still becoming challenging. There are gaps in this. So civil society and other actors, they raise money for, campaign Arm Women Now, where they there is a lack of female uniforms. So as usually, civil society is very actively involved also in covering this gap in the armed forces. And I will stop here, and thanks a lot for your attention, and we'll be glad to answer your questions.
Tamara, thank you so much. And the questions are coming already in chat, so please keep them coming. I will limit myself to only one question per speaker, and then we'll move on to the discussion and questions from the floor. First of all, Alisa, welcome. Alisa Kovalenko has joined us already from the ceremony. I hope it was an enjoyable film ceremony, and it was good to be a filmmaker again. Alisa, let me begin with you then. I watched your extremely powerful video testimony just earlier, and when I try to explain the experiences of service women in Ukraine, whenever I speak about this, I try to explain that the main challenge that they face is not necessarily the imperfect legal framework for recruitment, or the lack of appropriately designed uniforms, or the paternalistic attitudes of the command that you briefly mentioned on as well. It's a highly misogynistic enemy. I try to highlight the fact that in Russia, violence is essentially normalized, and domestic violence and gender-based violence has been decriminalized over the recent years. And as we've seen from media reports, Ukrainian women POWs are treated with particular brutality when they find themselves in Russian captivity. I wanted you to comment briefly on that. I've spoken to veterans who said that when they were choosing nom de guerre, for instance, while fighting, they would specifically choose either gender neutral or masculine form of reference, so that in case their communication is intercepted, it's not clear that they're women, so that they are not particularly targeted for captivity and so on. Just maybe comment a little bit more about that, about the nature of the enemy that we're facing, the Ukrainian army is facing, and its essentially misogynistic nature.
Actually, I would say in 2014 it was a bit different. I was even somehow more afraid of local separatist groups. But of course, at that time, you know, the Russians, they try to pretend that they're kind of like a brother were helping. So, and it was like a fake face, which they tried to play. And now we can see all what's faces, like what they face in reality. I never thought, like in 2014, I never thought that it could happen to me. And like with this, with full-scale invasion, with all these crimes, like even for me, it was like too much. To be honest, it was like really too much. And yeah, I didn't expect this. And it's yeah, they crossed all limits, and for enemy who cross this limit, they're not limits anymore about like about their crimes, so we can expect whatever. Yeah,
we'll come back to that, I'm sure, in the discussion. Tamara, I'd like to ask you about slightly different sort of achievements, the type of achievements, and that's the achievement of the perception of women in Ukrainian society that I think changed significantly. Perhaps one of the biggest achievements, in addition to the legal changes, the lifting of restrictions legally and so on. I remember in 2014, 15, 16, monitoring the media coverage of participation of service women in the war. There would often be these headlines: she cut her beautiful hair off and followed her loved one to the front line, and so on, and sort of emphasizing, sensationalizing women's participation, shaming men into action through that participation. Whereas now I really see a lot more attention being drawn to the professionalism of service women, to their achievements on battlefield or elsewhere. Even today, President Zelensky had an address on International Women's Day, and he specifically, I think, highlighted the question of equality in the armed forces and in society more generally. Just tell us a little bit how you see that achievement, but also how do we make it last? How do we make sure that it's not for the duration of the war only, and that this perception of women's roles and what it means to have masculine and feminine professions and so on will last beyond this war and after victory as well?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that for the 5 years, difference is tremendous, even for the greetings of International Women's Day, 8th of March. And also details, I would say, now even in a fiction, you know, in movies, there is a normality of women's participation. For example, movie Sniper, where made as a real story of also sniper Mykola Voronin, who is graduated of my university, Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, and you know, he is a main hero, and a group of other snipers, among them is women, and it's not perceived as something exotic. It's like normal, you know, daily activity, what they as a group of snipers do. And even in cartoons, you know, in cartoons about history of Ukraine, Книга Мандрівка Україна, you see there is particular season about war, and there, even in cartoons, there is recognition of this, especially long history and legacy of women's participation in national building processes and in fights for independence. And it's very important. You're absolutely right. Professionalism, not like exotization of this role, and not very big romanticization, because what we have now, and it's important to mention that masculinity and perception of men is also changing a bit, and more I see more and more men in military, they try to deromanticize this image of hero, and they talk about not so pleasant issues in the armed forces. And I think it's also important signal, because we do work a lot with, you know, women, femininity, but we forget men and masculinity, and this hegemonic, very heroic masculinity, where those men who are not in the armed forces, they are being ashamed. How to follow this? I think it's quite clear. I do see a very strong civil society and different groups and organizations in Ukraine that are so-called watchdog of democracy, and even despite the major challenge like war, survival, you know, victory, they try to criticize. It's not so easy, you know, when you have your major goal, yes, to criticize problems of misogyny, sexism, homophobia. So they do, you see a number of debates. I'm very positively see the changes also in media perception. Media is very, I would say, important agent of gender stereotypes in media. So I do think that we have strong civil society and different activist groups that will be this so-called watchdog of democracy, and this, you know, changes. What I would like to have more as a person from education and educator, it's of course some changes in secondary and higher education to make it more critical, less stereotypical. It's very also important to get rid of this Soviet legacy of gender segregated classes, you know, defenders of motherland, whatever, and it's another challenge, of course, you know, to work with education, but I do think that it will help a lot, you know, to maintain, to make these changes sustainable.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So what I propose we do, it's more fun to join the community in this meeting. So please put your hand up if you have a question, you don't mind asking it with your sound and or video on. But I'll begin with two that are already in chat. They are both related to figures. So one is from Francois, and Francois is asking, how do these impressive numbers of women in Ukrainian armed forces compare to other European armies, or perhaps armies in the world? And the second is related to that from Diana. Thank you for your excellent talk. 50,000 women, what percentage is that of the armed forces? I know people often ask that question, so perhaps Tamara could answer that. And there's a question for Alisa as well from Diana. How would you describe the difference between filming and actually being a soldier? What was proving yourself all the time a surprise? So more about your, you know, being both a filmmaker and a soldier experience, and then we'll take questions from the floor. So do put your hands up. Tamara, shall we begin with you?
Yeah. As for figures, I would try to, you know, answer in a critical way. You know, those questions with figures, percentage, very positivist, and the whole idea, you know, about them, of course, the more women you have, the larger numbers, the more impressive, the more wow effect. At the same time, I would say very recent data, they are not open. it's still an issue. What is the size of armed forces? And, you know, it's also an issue if women are, because armed forces, it's a very broad area. Only some, I would say 1/3 or even less, people who participate in the direct combat actions on the front line. Huge amount of people are those who support these people. And of course, women are mainly among those who are not in combat positions. As for combat, the figures that were publicly announced by representatives of Ministry of Defense, around 5,000, Alisa mentioned. And very roughly, this 50,000 that Ministry of Defense today announced, it's approximately, we may say 20%, but it was even before war and invasion like this. As I said, from one hand, it's a huge tradition of you know, constant wars and participating of women in the armed forces, tradition of dynasties, and also, you know, the fact that the whole families very often are in the military. And so it's with figures, it's always tricky, but of course, you know, journalists and people, they want to know this these figures. But as for veterans, it's approximately 6-7% women among veterans. So the same roughly percentage could be, I think, around 5 as for those who are doing combat actions. As to compare with other armed forces, especially France, unfortunately, I didn't have possibility to come to France for field study and to see the women in military there. But of course, we would say that France has a long tradition of women participating in fighting for, you know, for their rights. As Ukraine, but we may hear very often that in Ukraine the percentage of women is even more than in a number of NATO countries. What I would like to say is that I know more, for example, USA armed forces, and of course women there, as far as they have the longer tradition of professional step-by-step integration, so there could be also quite large percentage and visibility in a number of combat you know, in combat troops and in general, you know, the professionalism of women. Because as Alisa mentioned, you could see that in the videos, in the pictures, some would see that women may not look very professional, you know, long hair, sometimes makeup, other things. And so there are usually comments from those who are more used to more professional, you know, women. But of course, it takes some time, you know, to make armed forces as a professional labor market, and it's our task. As far as we have now constant threat and we don't know when the war ends, we hope for victory, but of course we need we, you know, have these challenges with figures, and there would be even, you know, more women in the armed forces.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alisa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, question. Yeah, so actually about difference between being filmmaker and being fighter, it's hard to compare, but I would say that being fighter in some very strange way is easier. Like, because like filmmaking, it's about like solving so many problems at the same time, and it's about like different layers of work on the front line. When you're just a simple soldier, actually you're much more concentrated on a few aims, and it's somehow like better for your brain. You just like controlling your sector, sitting in the trenches. It's harder, of course, physically, because you're sitting like in this whole like when it's cold, when it's rain, it's like yeah, and it's hard, especially for me. Cold was the most hardest thing. I was not so like paralyzed and afraid of bombings, but like cold, it was crazy. And sometimes we spent some days in very tiny like holes, tiny, like a very small position, so you cannot move a lot. And spring was very cold in Ukraine like last year, and it was challenging. Yeah, but it's not even that I like decided to leave frontline because I didn't want, but just like I felt my responsibility to finish project which I was working before for 3 years. And we had a very serious conversation with my husband and also co-producer of this project, like and he told me, okay, Alisa, you was fighting in real frontline, but now you have to fight on culture frontline, because documentary films is also our voices, and it's important message we can share with the audience. And also because all people watching news, but with documentary films, you can go through very deep emotional experience, and they can stay inside you for longer like time, and people can remember and feel very deeply, like emotionally also, like what people in Ukraine going through. So it was very hard dilemma for me, and it's still it is like what to do, like which front line to choose, like culture front line or yeah, like front line, real front line.
And we're really hoping to screen your documentary, the new documentary in London before long. I'm going to share information about it in chat so people can look it up. Tamara, a quick question to you. I don't see a lot of hands raised yet, but I've spotted some questions in chat. So one of them is the following. What kind of cooperation between Ukraine and EU or with EU member states would help to build gender equality in Ukrainian army? Which concrete steps or projects do you see as urgent and important? And there's another question on data. Is there any data, or can you comment on the status of non-gender conforming or trans people in the armed forces, and what kind of challenges they face, if any, or any specific instances that you're aware of?
Yeah, thanks a lot. You know, there are very good, important questions in the chat. It's again, I would like to talk about education and access and integration of women into education, especially military one, because according to the you know, there's norms of gender sensitive approach, there should be infrastructure to integrate women better to military education and training. So I would say, and currently there are, you know, a number of projects of rebuilding Ukraine after victory and after this, you know, damage of a lot of property, also education premises. So I would say, I would stress a lot on the education factor and excess of and non-stereotypical education in general and military education in particular. As for trans people, I would answer in general about LGBTQI plus military. You can't believe, but there is even such, you know, groups in Ukraine, and LGBT plus military becoming more and more visible, despite some, you know, challenges of perception. Moreover, Ukrainian society after invasion became much less homophobic. The tremendous changes in public opinion. I have particular article on this. I will put your link later in chat. That society is becoming more, I would say, more pro rights of LGBT people, especially as for, you know, basic rights, registered partnership. Yesterday, one of the female deputies, Inna Sovsun, actually filed a draft law on the recognition of registered partnership in Ukraine. It's for all people, but also for LGBT people particularly. And there are different art projects with LGBTQI, and I would say this group is becoming more and more visible, and it's also one of so-called civilizational choice between Euro integration and so-called Ruski Mir. Because Russia is using homophobic propaganda also very strongly in their propaganda discourse. So it's quite important question, and I do hope that Ukrainian politicians in general will support this legislation, and there will be also some changes for LGBT military as for their basic rights.
Fantastic, thank you. We meant to be wrapping up now, but both of our speakers agreed to stay on a little bit longer, although both of them have to leave soon. So we have one question from the floor from Aaron, and I'm just asking Aaron to unmute now and ask the question.
Oh, great, thank you. I really appreciate it, and thank you for your service and leadership and and the great talk that you've all put on. My question's a quick two-part. One is, how do you see the role of women expanding in territorial forces, which are more local, obviously, versus regular and reserve forces, which will be obviously more expeditionary or dynamic or surge-based? And that's sort of the first part. The second is, given the scale of the destruction and the massive reconstruction that'll go on, how do you see the positioning of women, in essence, sort of ahead of time in the massive sort of reconstruction army that will have to be developed? Because obviously, it's probably millions of, if not tens of millions of parts of structures in Ukraine that have been damaged or destroyed. And so that women don't sort of fall behind the whole reconstruction effort, but they can be actually at the leading edge of that.
Tamara, I think you're muted.
Yes, as for the first question about women in territorial defense, so this data are even, I would say, less open, but very roughly, I would say 5% of women are. And I know women, even some of my friends who were ready, who know how to, to use guns, and they were ready to join, but due to the lack of resources, even for men, when invasion started, so of course the priority was given for men first of all, due to a number of reasons. So we do have examples and willingness of women to participate, and I do hope that with more resources and more training, the percentage will increase from 5 even to to more. As for reconstruction, sustainability, and women's involvement, I would say currently there are a number of projects, and you see in each project there is quite strong gender component. So gender, feminist civil society rather actively involved. They are talking in general, how to make this, how to make cities more comfortable for different vulnerable groups, not only gender sensitive, but in general with how to. And actually I would say that currently it's quite clear that and women are quite visible actors in different projects when you talk about renovation and rebuilding, because on the local level also with this reform of decentralization, women are very active actors and leaders in their local communities. It's in our Verkhovna Rada we have only 20% of women, but in local communities you have, I would would say, much more women. And I do think that, you know, they will try to, you know, to have more, I would say, human-centered perspective and to pay attention to different groups of people while doing this reconstruction and rebuilding.
Thank you so much, Tamara. And there's another question, and this will be the last question, I'm afraid, and it's for Alisa. I'll read it out. Dear Alisa, your film Home Games and the conversation after it showed online here during the Ukrainian Film Festival left a profound impression on me. I can't wait for your next feature. I am in awe of your physical bravery and your decision to fight on the front line. Do you think serving under female commanders would be easier than under male commanders? And do you think male commanders are reluctant to take female soldiers into their units because that means facing a potential loss of young mothers in the fighting, and the male officers don't want that burden on their shoulders? So a complicated question. You're muted, Alisa. Still muted. Let's try.
Okay.
Perfect.
Now, but I couldn't unmute myself. So thank you for the comment first. Yeah, we hope that we will also show the film in first in Kiev, and yeah, also like we will have lots of festivals as well. And yeah, second aspect is more complex. No, it's not about even being with a man, but it's more about being with men who can understand you. For me, it doesn't make any difference to be in female or in men's, because there are also some not really tolerant female fighters, and I knew some like not very adequate. But it's about level of education, and it's about how to say, like way of thinking and mentality. For me, it's more about this. I was lucky because I was really in a unit where like we all were like very had like a high level of education, things like this. Bars was like very wise commander, and he understood me a lot. But even in this kind of like unique unit, there was this like stereotypes and like things like patriarchal like elements. So no, for me, actually, I even noticed when I became a mother, I noticed that these patriarchal things often coming from women, actually. And that sometimes it's even mistakes that it's coming from men. Sometimes women create this kind of like continuation of this patriarchal society. So no, we just have to like work on this educational system, start from school, really, because for many men it's like hard to change already the way of mentality, way of thinking. Yeah, so no, for me it doesn't make any difference like if it will be female or male.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. Well, it is all about education, about raising awareness. And I'm so grateful to both of you, Tamara Martsenyuk and Alisa Kovalenko, for raising that awareness and sharing your knowledge and sharing your insights and your personal experience as well with us today. And I'm really grateful to all of you who were able to join us today for this discussion. I just want to remind you that it is recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel. And there are some discussions that we've already held relevant to this topic. I just shared one in chat now that are already on our YouTube channel. So please take a look at them and share them with those people who might be interested. And before I thank our speakers again, I would just like to encourage all of you to support the Ukrainian military, they support the Ukrainian veteran movement, and in particular Ukrainian women's veteran movement. And if you do get an opportunity, please do support Ukrainian Institute London in any ways you can by attending our events, whether that's in person or online, and by spreading the word about our work. Tamara Martsenyuk, Alisa Kovalenko, thank you so much for your time, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.